thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass it over to Nia Evans to introduce our speakers.
Thank you very much, Felice. There are going to be 3 different moments of introductions for our speakers. So the first will be reading the formal bios, but then we'll go into a couple of questions for them that'll provide a different type of introduction. And before I go into the formal introductions, I just want to talk about how this conversation is organized. So we've organized it as part artist talk, part book talk, touching upon both personal and historical. So just want to make sure I provide that frame. Okay, the formal bios about Tomashi Jackson. And Tomashi, this is long, so okay, just know. Tomashi Jackson, born 1980 in Houston, Texas, was raised in Los Angeles, California. She received her MFA in painting and printmaking from Yale School of Art in 2016, her Master of Science in Art, Culture, and Technology from the MIT School of Architecture and Planning in 2012, her BFA from the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in 2010, and is a 2019 alumnus of the Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture. Jackson's work has been included in recent solo exhibitions at the Neuberger Museum of Art, the Paris Art Museum, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard University, and the Wexner Center for the Arts. She has participated in numerous group exhibitions, including Here is a Gale Warning, Art, Crisis, and Survival at Kettle's Yard, University of Cambridge, Power of the People, Art and Democracy at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, Going Dark, the Contemporary Figure at the Edge of Visibility at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, Multiplicity at the Frist Art Museum, Working Thought at the Carnegie Museum of Art, Off the Record at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, and the 2019 Whitney Biennial. Jackson was the recipient of the Rappaport Prize in 2023, the Roy R. Neuberger Prize in 2022, and the Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Grant in 2020. Jackson's artworks are in numerous museum collections, including the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the Museum of Contemporary Art Los Angeles, the Baltimore Museum of Art, the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, and the Perez Art Museum, Miami. Jackson was also in residence at the Robert Rauschenberg Foundation in Captiva, Florida in 2025, and lives and works in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Tomashi Jackson. About Dr. Gerald Horne. Dr. Gerald Horne is an American historian who holds the John J. and Rebecca Morris Professorship of History and African American Studies at the University of Houston. His research has addressed issues of racism in a variety of relations involving labor, politics, civil rights, international relations, and war. Horne has published dozens of books, including a path-breaking account of slavery and Jim Crow in Texas, and has written extensively about the film industry. Dr. Horne received his PhD in history from Columbia University and his JD from the University of California, Berkeley, and his BA from Princeton University. Dr. Gerald Horne. Now for further introduction. In slang, a B-side refers to a person's secret, unpolished, or less popular side that differs from their public persona. The term originates from the two sides of vinyl records, where the A side was the main promoted track, and the B side was the secondary or bonus track. Therefore, in a metaphorical and slang sense, the B side is the less obvious, uncensored, or secret you. So, each of you, can you take up to 3 minutes? You don't have to use the whole time, but what's your B side?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. I guess I was introduced as a historian, but before I was a historian, I was a political activist and also a politicized lawyer as well, working for the Hospital Workers Union in New York as a counsel. As a political activist, I was a real globetrotter. I mean, I lived in Zimbabwe, I lived in Hong Kong. traveled, and of course I've since taken that peripatetic nature into scholarship, because in doing history I've done research in Brazil, Southern Africa, Hong Kong again, Western Europe, all over the United States, etc. I guess that responds to your question.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Horne. Tomashi, what's your B-side?
I told you this was going to be a hard one for me. I really appreciate good naps. Oh, I have a very active dream life. But I feel like all of that just shows up I feel like everything about me shows up in the work. It makes I'm not certain that I have any B-sides left, but I really like naps. I really love love. Fantasize about living in Greece part of the year. Yeah, I guess I really appreciate sleep.
That's a good B-side. And I actually don't think that that's obvious in your work or in interacting with you either. Okay. Second or third introductory question.
I know.
Okay, boom.
No, it shows up in the work still now. As a preteen, I fantasized about being a lounge singer.
That does kind of show up in the work,
I
yeah.
have
Okay.
nothing to hide.
Okay. Intentionally or not, and Dr. Horne, you actually started to talk about this a little bit already, but intentionally or not, we bring all of ourselves to our work. What part of your values and or personal bio or experience shows up in your work?
Oh, I think it's evident and obvious. Social justice, equity, diversity, equity, inclusion. Can I say that in Texas? Anti-racism, anti-imperialism, justice, feminism. I would like to think all of those qualities show up at least in my written work. And to a degree, I would like to think it shows up in my activism, which is not as active as it was when I had less gray hair, but is still there.
Thank you, Dr. Horne.
Can you repeat the question?
Yes. Intentionally or not, we bring all of ourselves to our work. What part of your values and or personal bio or experience shows up in your work?
My values. There's a lot. You know this because we're so close. But as I'm aging, as I'm aging in the absence of my elders, there are a lot of characteristics that I see and feel now as I'm maturing that are positive, that I associate with them, but that might be in part because I miss them. But there are things that I was raised by someone who was raised by domestic workers who were born and toiled here in Texas and in Northern and Southern California. And there were things that I was told to do under threat that it annoyed me and I wanted to rebel against, like making my bed every day, and then making my bed a certain way. Like we made our beds a certain way in our homes, but it was informed by my great aunts and how they cleaned people's homes. So that thing where you there's the sheet and then there's I didn't expect to be saying this, there's the blanket, then you fold the top sheet over the top of the blanket, and then there's the comforter. Oh, then there's the pillows. So then that happens, and then there's the pillow set up. Then there's the comforter, and then there's tucking the comforter under the pillows and then folding the top of the comforter over the top of the pillows. At a certain point in my teenage years, I was like, this is ridiculous. But now I appreciate it, my values. So there's a lot that I associate with my late mother and my aunts. I feel like it shows up when I'm deep in my work. That's what I feel. Like I feel like I work hard, like they worked hard. But then there are other things that I think are just me that my mother tolerated. That it was like different from other, maybe just showed up in different ways. And the other children in my family, I always had a lot of questions. And I also kind of associate that with what has ended up happening with this show, the fact that this show ended up coming here to Houston. Thank you so much, Cam, for welcoming the show to Houston. Thank you so much, Ryan and the team and Miranda Lash at MCA Denver for making this miracle happen. It feels like a miracle because I was gestated here for 9 months, and the show actually, the run of the show is 9 months, which is the longest. It's the longest iteration of this traveling show. Anyways, but this Texas thing, see, I'm getting emotional. I lost myself, sorry. So I had a lot of questions because my elders could not talk about what they experienced here. They would only go so far before their throats would like tighten up. They would choke up and like not talk. My grandfather was like this. My great aunt was like this. And I always had questions. So when we were gathered together for like family gatherings, I would be like, you know, a million cousins, a million aunties, a million uncles, now's the time. Where did we come from? Now would be the time, you know, when everybody's together. And my mother would like shush me, knowing that asking those types of questions could unearth pain that was undue for the elders who experienced it. And so there was this, you know, when we were together, there was this emphasis on the present, but I still had all these questions like, you know, why is there snow on the mountains, but it's hot here growing up in Southern California, or, you know, whatever. I just had a lot of questions, and I was lucky that I was raised by someone who was an operating engineer. So if she were alive, she could tell us about how all the HVAC works in here. She could tell us about like where electricity is coming from into the building from the city. So I always had a lot of questions, and I learned from them to work hard. And when I'm in the studio or working on projects, I feel like it shows up in everything I do.
Thank you, Tomashi. So this was actually a question from Dr. Horne to you, Tomashi, but I'll ask it, which is, what has been the role of White Rock from San Francisco to Los Angeles in your work?
I feel like I shouldn't have told y'all anything. Ooh, White Rock, Texas is where my grandmother's people were born and from, and where there was a farm. I understand this is now referred to as White Rock Lake. This is now Metro Dallas. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I didn't know. Gosh, because so there was like, there are these people in my family with these extraordinary memories, but you had to ask the right way to get anything, and almost no one would ever allow me to record them. When I was a student at MIT, thanks for your support, Nia. When I was a student at MIT, I had to write a thesis, and I chose to focus my thesis on informal labor and Black women's informal laboring bodies as transforming the built environment, you know, as transformers of public space. Having moved to the East Coast and observed women who looked like me pushing carriages and wheelchairs, engaged in domestic labor in public space, in plain sight, but operating often you know, in fear of punitive response from the state as their employers benefit from tax avoidance. And I had taken a class at the Kennedy School of Government on informal economies that opened my eyes to the fact that, like, well, I was the only artist in the room, but I was learning about classical economic theory and progressive economic theory, and I was seeing my family's story in these white papers that we were reading and this research that we were doing about informal labor all over the world. And a part of that was silence. I was like, oh, that's my people. Oh, this is my history. This is our labor history. And my mother, my aunt who raised me, so I was born here in 1980 of a painter. and her sister raised me and became the person that I knew as my mother, and she was a photographer and an engineer. She was my grandmother's oldest child who went to work with my great aunts as they cleaned people's homes and they cooked for people. So, the first person I called was my aunt, who's an accountant, like an acclaimed accountant in Southern California. Because I'm like, this is about money, right? So I should call you. And she's like, I don't remember any of that. I wasn't old enough. You have to talk to Ava. She's the one who went to work with them. So with like very, very bad technology that I had access to in 2010, I recorded these conversations with my mother, asking her about our family's labor history. And you actually helped me organize those questions as a survey, because you're good at that kind of stuff. And the recordings are awful, because it wasn't like today where we can just like log into Zoom and push record. You couldn't even record from Skype. I had to pirate some recording software off the internet and use that with a bad internet connection at a library while Nia was doing work tutoring some kid, a young person, and not a goat, but a young person. So what ends up happening is I have these like glitchy recordings of my mother talking about our family's history, and in that she talks about White Rock, Texas. She talks about how my aunt, our great aunt Jacqueline Ball, was born in 1915 in White Rock, Texas, and that she and her sisters, she had all these siblings, and their father went away for work, as black men often did, and never returned, as black men often disappeared when out working. And when her mother died, she was left to raise her siblings and wait on the sides of railroad tracks for people to throw coal so that they could heat the house, and all that stuff. So this is the only iteration of this iteration of the show is the first time that this work has been included minute by minute. And it's also, when the show is up, when the sound is up, it's embedded with the sound of that conversation. Thanks, Cam, for being like so contemporary that we literally invented ways of showing this work that had never happened before. But it's a sound collage that opera director Alexander Gideon made that merges this broken conversation with the vocals of Michael McDonald from the Doobie Brothers' 1978 album, Minute by Minute, which was something that I remember because my mother and I shared it together. She shared it with me. So upon her death during the lockdown, what remained of her memory has been lost. Her photographs have been lost. So much was lost. But the music that we shared together stays inside of me and can't be taken away. So 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 White Rock, San Francisco, and Los Angeles, those are places where my people were. So they migrated from Texas first to Northern California, and then eventually mostly settling in Southern California. My grandfather lived in the Fillmore district with my grandmother by marriage, Leophis Gibson, for 40 years. So I always understood that the places where my people were Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Texas. And so, that's just, I guess it's the reason why I exist, and it is a place of great mystery.
Thank you, Tomashi. Dr. Horne, just going to pause if you want to respond to what Tomashi just said.
Well, we may get to this later, but well, first of all, I should mention a footnote, which is I too come from a long line of domestic workers as well. But with regard to San Francisco, for example, how long were you there, and how do you think that experience might be reflected in this work that we're seeing?
Well, I went there right out of high school, so I graduated high school, and Arts High School, for any of my fellow cousins who are here, I graduated from Los Angeles County High School for the Arts, where I learned that art school was a possibility for a person like me, and I went to the San Francisco Art Institute, which was historically the oldest art college west of the Mississippi River, that closed. Is being reimagined as something else, the spaces, but I just always feel like it's important to mention that. But that took me to San Francisco in 1998, and I stayed there until 2001. But my grandparents lived there for 40 years, so my entire life was spent, making the drive up there for holidays, making long distance calls. Y'all don't know about that. No one in here is old enough to remember that. But, like being called to the phone, like it's time to call grandmommy and granddaddy in the 415 area code. But yeah, so what I didn't understand, so their neighborhood had just always been black. And like, the painted ladies on Alamo Square. Like I had just always known, I grew up knowing these elders who owned their homes there. And then when I lived there, all of the property owners, all of my landladies had always been black women. And I don't really want to get into, I was there when the change happened, when the .com bubble burst and the major cultural displacement happened there. So they were just there for a long time. And so part of me was there as long as they were. So I had never known a time when they weren't there. But what I hadn't put together until I started asking people questions was that that there was a reason why there were so many black people there. And I just kind of took it for granted because it always had been, but I didn't know that there were other black families in mass that had moved from Texas to the Bay, and then to Southern California. That was actually where I started asking people questions at the clubs because I was a party girl. But I still had all these questions, much to the chagrin of people who just wanted to chill. But I would be standing outside of the club asking people like, "Where'd your people come from? Cutie, talk to me." And I would hear from black people and Chicano people about these migrations from Texas, and I'm like, that's interesting. That's my family's path. So yeah, I was there as a wild thing for a few years on my own. But my grandparents were there for as long as I knew them.
Mm-hmm. And we will talk about San Francisco.
The
later.
influence on the work, muralism. I dropped out of school, and I was enamored with the vibrant life of the city of San Francisco and Oakland. There was a vibrant muralism culture that was happening there, that was being passed along. So I was mentored by Juana Alicia, Susan Cervantes, and Presida I's Mural Arts Center, Emmanuel C. Montoya. There was a lot of work for a young artist to do. There were a lot of walls, and there was a lot of community organizing that had been done to fund projects. So I actually hardly ever went to museums. All of my art life was spent on the street. At night, I was running around with Alicia Wormsley and her brother, doing illegal things. Oh shoot, I shouldn't say that. It was we were doing graffiti in the tunnels, but there were places where people weren't. It was just kind of accepted. It was it was another kind of gallery. It was another kind of studio that would happen underground at night, and then during the day, I learned how to put up scaffolding, learned how to not be afraid of heights, and learned how to visualize people's stories in public space because of mentorship was available there. I think of that time as being like rings of a tree. The tree hadn't been cut down yet. So you could go, you could have questions about public space. Your eyes could be wide, and there were efforts afoot all over the place that would put that wonder to work.
Thank you, Tomashi. I was thinking about muralism, so I'm glad you jumped in with that. So, Dr. Horne, you've mentioned a personal migration story. Can you talk to us about Mississippi to St. Louis?
Yeah, my roots, at least my parents' roots, are in Mississippi. Starkville, Mississippi, where Mississippi State University is located. My mother's father was a janitor there. And my father is from the Mississippi-Alabama border. I just found out that this name Horne that I carry is sort of artificial because he actually was born with the name Holmes. But like many black men in the heart of darkness that was Mississippi, he found it necessary to flee. And so when he got to St. Louis, where I was born, he took the name Horne. And I guess it worked because they never tracked him down. Interestingly enough, as I pointed out to you all, just this past Sunday in the New York Times, there was an article about the journey of my family, because my sister curated this exhibit at the Missouri Historical Society. And it talks about another sort of migration, because what happens is that the neighborhood I was born into in St. Louis, like many black neighborhoods, it was subjected to so-called urban renewal, Negro removal, and therefore we were dispersed, ousted, for example. And there's now it's an exhibit there. It's very ironic. It's getting publicity. I guess it's a part of history now, interestingly enough. But since that time, I've been, as I said in my introductory remarks, I've been moving around quite a bit in the United States and elsewhere.
Thank you, Dr. Horne. Do you want to respond? You don't have to.
I'm thinking about that name change
Right?
and about records and recordlessness, and history, and just because for me, I have come to realize over the course of many projects that I require history to understand the movements of larger numbers of people to kind of estimate what happened with my people, because of, you know, like the names. I mean, people have to change their names. So I'm just thinking about that, you know, like how much really ends up being unknowable for people who have to run. And the way that when I could hear what was being talked about when the grown folks were talking about Texas, and we always had cousins who were still here, but it sounded like running, like it sounded like from my grandmother and her sisters and their brothers that it sounded like they had to run. I don't know how better to say that it was like a fleeing. So yeah, like trying to find records of them now is very difficult.
Thank you. So we'll keep talking about some more running. Can you talk to us, Dr. Horne, about the migration stories of enslaved Africans from Texas to Mexico?
Sure. As many of you may have learned in school, there was a secession from Mexico, spearheaded by Sam Houston, Stephen F. Austin et al., circa 1836, not least because Mexico, under a president of African descent, speaking of Vicente Guerrero, had moved towards the abolition of slavery. And of course, these men were enslavers. And they succeeded with that secession and set up the Texas Republic. But the Texas Republic had bitten off more than it could chew, because it had to come into confrontation with abolitionists in London, not to mention their allies in Haiti, because Haiti had overthrown slavery by 1804 and had begun to ally with abolitionists worldwide. And this created favorable conditions for the enslaved population to free south into Mexico. It's estimated over about a 30-year period, about 3,000 to 5,000 enslaved Africans fled into Mexico. It also complicated relations, needless to say, between Texas and Mexico, because if you estimate that each enslaved person who fled was worth about $1,000, you could do the math and figure out the significant capital loss. Then, because of the aforementioned pressure from abolitionism worldwide, Texas found it necessary to enter the United States of America in 1845. Although, as you probably know, even today, there are grumblings and rumblings about Texas seceding from the United States of America, once again. And this conflict over this capital loss, that is to say, the capital flight into Mexico, really exacerbates relations between the United States, which is now bulwarked by slave-owning Texas, and Mexico, which of course leads to the war with Mexico, 1846 to 1848, wherein the United States walks away with California and a good deal of what is now the U.S. Southwest as the nation spreads from the Atlantic to the Pacific. So this question of slavery was an essential element in terms of the construction of Texas as both an independent republic. I should have mentioned when I was talking about the Texas Republic that the Lone Star flag of the independent state of Texas could be found off the coast of Angola in Southwest Africa, off the coast of Brazil, off the coast of Cuba. Galveston was a major port of entry for enslaved Africans, not to mention a major embarkation point for slave ships sailing to those areas, Cuba, Brazil, Angola, for example. And given the growth of abolitionist sentiment, this was not necessarily winning plaudits amongst the abolitionists, the fact that you had this major enslaving enterprise right here on this land.
Thank you. Tomashi, do you want to respond?
The Maroon settlements.
Oh, yes. So Maroons, that's a reference to Africans who escaped the jurisdiction of the enslavers and set up independent communities. For example, one of the more significant Maroon settlements was on the Virginia-North Carolina border, the Great Dismal Swamp. There's been a lot of writing about the Great Dismal Swamp. And in fact, those of you who are music fans might be familiar with Max Roach, the drummer. He had roots in the Great Dismal Swamp. And then Jamaica is well known for its Maroon communities in the mountains, for example. So swamps, mountains. And they were rather influential and powerful, although in Jamaica it's still controversial because oftentimes they would broker agreements with the enslavers to return fleeing black people, for example. And then some of the more significant Maroon communities were in Brazil. In fact, some of you may be familiar with the film Quilombo. And if you're not familiar with it, you probably should see it. It's a very moving docudrama about this very profound Maroon settlement in Brazil, which lasted about a century. The Great Dismal Swamp probably lasted a similar period of time, but it was not as large as the Quilombo or the Palmares is another term that existed in Brazil. And really, you should check out that film, Quilombo. It came out about 40 years ago.
I found some references to this that I wanted to just read a little bit from. This is from Cedric Robinson. Soon, however, the fugitive slaves grew numerous enough to begin the formation of their own settlements, communities that came to be known in Mexico as palenques. Okay. See, learning together. Edgar Love recalls Aguirre Beltran's estimate that by 1579, some 2,000 blacks had escaped from their masters. Love goes on to indicate that for more than a century, the escaped slave was a serious problem in many parts of Mexico. David Davidson, writing of the third quarter of the century, declares, by the 1560s, fugitive slaves from the mines of the north were terrorizing the regions from Guadalajara to Zacatecas, allying with the Indians and raiding ranches. In one case, Maroons from the mines of Guanajuato joined with unpacified Chichimec Indians in a brutal war with the settlers. The viceroy was informed that they were attacking travelers, burning ranches, and committing similar misdeeds. To the east, slaves from the Pachuca mines took refuge in an inaccessible cave from which they sallied forth periodically to harass the countryside. Negroes from the Atotonilco and Tonavista mines joined them with arms and created an impregnable palenque. and this other bit, it's too much to go like deeply into, but some of these people are named. Zumbi, according to Ramos, was already a well-known chief whose deeds amazed even the white soldiery. He would apparently reign as king in New Palmares, until its end, almost 2 decades later. So this was a Palmares that existed in the mountains of Mexico and was successful for almost 2 decades. But in his ascension to authority, it is possible to recognize what Ramos and others have described as the Bantu origins of Palmares. The perception of authentic authority as identical with secured social integrity was characteristically Central African. Palmares did fall eventually in 1694, the result of campaigns launched by successive Portuguese governors of Pernambuco, João da Cunha Sotomayor, Marques de Montebello, and Melo de Castro. The last expedition sent against it consisted of nearly 3,000 men and was in the field for several months. The final siege was established on 10 November 1693 and lasted until February of the following year. The total cost of the adventure was estimated by Melo de Castro as somewhere near 1,400,000 cruzados. On the night of 5 February 1694, Zumbi, organizer of the defense of Palmares, having discovered that his position on Baringa Mountain had been nearly encircled, sought a last desperate chance to escape. The result was described by a colonel. So this is like all really well documented, and it's amazing. I'm just learning about this now, so that's a part of why I have questions about this. About this relationship between Africans in Mexico and liberation seeking.
I know you find creative uses for audio and video, and so Cedric Robinson, whose work you were reading, we were colleagues in Santa Barbara some years ago, and we used to appear regularly discussing news events, particularly global events, and that can be found at his archive, which is at Santa Barbara, or it can be found at NYU. These discussions from decades ago, for example.
This is, I'm sorry, I know we really,
I was just going to say very cool.
Very, very cool. Nia and I, when we first became friends, used to be running around at Santa Barbara a lot. We would drive up there to listen to speakers, and eventually did the chalk drawing festival too. Just a reminder that we left note cards, index cards in everyone's seats with pencils. So if you're having thoughts or if questions are forming, just want to remind you to write them down. We're going to collect them at the end to make sure that Dr. Horne and Nia can answer some questions. I'm just going to hang out. But this little section is what I was looking for. So in the mountains near Mount Orizaba, led by this man called Yanga, reputedly a Congolese chief from an African kingdom bordered by the Nyonga River, the Yanguicos had won the formal status as a free black settlement. The mountains, however, seemed to promise much more security to some Yanguicos, and other cimarrones than the words and treaties of their Spanish oppressors. Throughout New Spain, palenques continued to multiply, and with a still undetermined frequency, to give occasion for the establishment of officially recognized free communities. This blew my mind. In a period between 1630 and 1635, for example, an agreement was reached with cimarrones whose redoubts had been established in the mountains of Totula, Palmilla, Tumbacaretas, and Totolinga near Veracruz. The town of San Lorenzo Cerralvo became their free settlement. In 1769, a similar history preceded the establishment of Nuestra Senora de Guadalupe de los Morenos de Amapa, near the southern tip of the modern state of Veracruz. We have learned of their existence through quite recent research into the early colonial history of New Spain.
Thank you. Okay. Dr. Horne, let's spend some time on the migration stories of Black communities from San Francisco to British Columbia, then back to San Francisco and the South.
This is something I know something about because actually I spent most of 2025 in Canada, actually in Victoria, British Columbia. As I joke, half seriously, I was intending to defect, but they wouldn't accept me. So I wound up doing research on, initially the research was on the Black population of that area in the Pacific Northwest, the Canadian Southwest. But one of the stories I lighted on had to do with what happened in 1858 when the besieged Black population of San Francisco moved en masse to Victoria, British Columbia. And interestingly enough, BC, the founding father, to use that term, was a man of African ancestry, Sir James Douglas. And he was welcoming them because there was conflict between British Columbia, or British Canada, if I can use that term, and the United States, which was a signal aspect of 19th century history. And gold had been found in BC, and so the Euro-Americans were flooding across the border, and it was felt that if enough of them were to settle there, then that territory could then be U.S. territory. So Sir James Douglas invited all these U.S. Negroes who were quite ready to move, given what they were facing in the city by the bay. But what happens is that, the Civil War erupts, and slavery is abolished by 1865, and many of the Black people from the United States felt that the United States was enjoying a new birth of freedom, and they began to move back to the United States. And then the status of Sir James became incompatible with the population mix. That is to say, the plethora of Euro-Americans who were not necessarily captivated by the idea of a Black founding father. I should also mention in this context, there was a difference between the kind of colonialism of British Columbia and what existed on this side of the border. That is to say that in BC, it was extractive colonialism. That is to say, timber, fur, which then presupposed certain kinds of relations with the indigenous population. Whereas in the United States, it was more settler colonialism, which oftentimes involved the liquidation of the indigenous population. In fact, on this book on Texas, on the last page, even though it's not based on original research, I found it necessary to list scores of different indigenous groupings here in Texas who no longer, I shouldn't say no longer exist, but to a certain extent that is an accurate assessment. I'm sure their DNA is still existed, perhaps even in some of the people in this room, but as communities, they no longer exist. And that was one of the differences between the colonialism on this side of the border and the colonialism on the other side. I mean, to the point, the Canadians, I found during my stay here, they felt that if you said anything complimentary about Canada vis-a-vis the United States, that it was undermining the progressive struggle, which I sort of understand. But by the same token, I mean, the First Nations, as they called them in Canada, wield much more influence in Canada than the indigenous population in the United States of America, for various reasons. But in any event, I'll be talking about that in a forthcoming book.
Thank you, Dr. Horne. Tomashi, do you want to respond?
What was the question again?
Well, I mean, the question isn't for you. Do you want to respond to what Dr. Horne just talked about?
Yeah, the migration from San Francisco to Canada and back, I had never heard of that either. And when we were talking about that, I actually thought a lot about how there are some people, I've met people in the world who, in my travels, who understand San Francisco, I've been told that San Francisco is a white city. which was like shocking to me. Just historically lived experience and also like historic fact. But when he told us about this northern migration into Canada and then returning, because I'm always wondering, like, where were my people? You know, like I descend from someone who was a part of a part of these movements of people, and the Black communities of San Francisco. It just made me think about how people came back from up north and then over and up from the south, working in the shipyards, what becomes Bayview Hunters Point, what becomes the Fillmore District, the Western Addition. And, the Western Addition and the Fillmore District, it's that community that became victims of Jim Jones, of the People's Temple. So I'm thinking about when you talk about how people moved en masse to British Columbia and then with hopes of things getting better here came back, I immediately thought about how their descendants, how long Black people had been there, which was my understanding, growing up. Like this has been, it's like these are not new neighborhoods, these are not new relationships, these are not new community institutions, but it is. At some point, I learned that the victims of the People's Temple were Black people living all along Divisadero, and that they too were hoping for something better. Like that's why they were vulnerable to that person's influence, was that he was preaching a gospel of integration and equity. So just thinking about these hopes, the hopes of these people moving and trying to create spaces with and for each other, and these other things that happened.
And
Well, yeah, just as a footnote, just for people who may not be familiar, the late 1970s, the People's Temple in San Francisco, led by Reverend Jim Jones, they moved en masse to Guyana, on the northern coast of South America. And what ensued is, you could describe it as mass suicide, or you could describe it as suicide plus homicide, with hundreds of people dead. There have been a number of striking radio documentaries about that, and of course it's bequeathed to us the unfortunate phrase of drinking the Kool-Aid, for example, in terms of the suicidal aspects. I should also mention, as a professor, when you're speaking, you're supposed to also provide bibliographic references for further study for the students. And so I should mention that the leader of the Black San Francisco community that migrated, Mifflin Gibbs, Mifflin Gibbs, also wound up writing a memoir that you can find online or elsewhere. And then when he came back to the United States, he got involved in Republican Party politics. Recall that at that time, Republican Party still had the kind of reputation as the party of abolition, and got posted to Madagascar as a diplomat. And I only mention that because also part of that Black American Malagasy or Madagascar connection is a name you may be familiar with, or at least the work you may be familiar with. Andy Razaf, A-R-A-Z-A-F. He of course wrote Ain't Misbehavin'. Somebody can break into the song right now. Or perhaps even more appropriate for this occasion, and please somebody break into song. What did I do to be so black and blue? Takers? No?
I'm not gonna do it.
And thank you, I appreciate this, because I was actually going to do an extension of the prior question, because you talked about the move from San Francisco to British Columbia and back, but then there is also a piece of this that was coming back, then there was also move to the south. Can you talk about that piece?
Well, there's a migration, as we've already noted, this migration from Texas to San Francisco. It's not coincidental, as historians oftentimes like to say, that the first black mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, had roots in Texas. The first black mayor of San Francisco, Willie Brown, had roots in Texas. They were emblematic of that migratory pattern. And then one of the more unfortunate aspects of this migratory pattern is that it more or less accelerates around the time of World War I, 1941 to 1945. And you may also recall that there was another forced migration of Japanese Americans from Seattle to San Diego, forced to abandon their homes, their property, etc. And as historians such as myself have pointed out, it's ironic, speaking euphemistically, that in a city like Los Angeles, Little Tokyo became Bronzeville. That is to say, as the Japanese Americans, the Issei and the Nisei were being evacuated, forced to move out, you had black people moving into those neighborhoods, for example. Maya Angelou, in fact, talks about this in one of her books because she was part of the Arkansas to San Francisco migratory pattern. And so you can find references to that in one of her memoirs.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to talk about art a little bit. So you've had a chance to explore the exhibition a bit before this conversation. Please take up to 3 minutes, you don't have to use the whole time, to discuss a piece or element of the show that calls to you for any reason.
Well, the Sandra Bland piece, and I only say that because, well, first of all, Sandra Bland, you may recall, was the black woman who had a deadly encounter with the authorities and therefore entered the unfortunate pantheon that includes Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, et al. And Professor Jackson has the video, the audio from that encounter, which is incorporated in one of the works. And, obviously, since I was in Texas at that time, it happened in Prairie View, for example. I find that quite moving. And likewise, the video from the encounter in Dallas, I can't recall the names that would allow you to.
Dejaria Becton,
The sister
Tatiana Rhodes. That's the little
Yeah.
girl was Dejaria Becton, and the policeman doing all of those things to her was Eric Case Bolt.
Yeah, it's quite something. I mean, I recommend you watch that video. I mean, it's illuminating.
It's called Vibrating Boundaries, the Law of the Land. And the mother who reads to the children in the first part of that piece. Naima, are you still here? Naima? Where are you? Can you stand up? Yeah. Thank you, Naima Jackson. She reads to her children in that piece, and it becomes interspersed with what I later learned is an art historical term called tableau vivant, where I interact with a local artist named Patrick Renner and another local artist named Emily Peacock, wrapped in knitted color studies, reenacting stress positions from the cell phone documentation of those interactions with police and black girls and women that summer in Texas 2015. And it's accompanied by, the first sound in the piece is Naima reading to her children from Josef Albers's Interaction of Color, the 1965 text that most of us who learn visual art in the modern era interact with at some point. And then the sound of cicadas recorded from live from Project Row Houses that summer, which is where I felt safe doing these experiments after Sandra Bland was killed. My plan had been to go to McKinney, Texas, and find someone to engage in those stress positions. You know, so like 1 minute, 2 minute, holding specific moments in those interactions still. I intended to come here and to do that where that took place in that subdivision, but then Sandra Bland was killed, and I realized other things had happened to other women that summer too. And it occurred to me that it wasn't safe for me to follow through with that plan. And the wonderful people at Project Row Houses allowed me to use a row house and do stuff there, which is how I met Naima and her family, and then they came back and read for me. And then Patrick and Emily held those stress positions with me, and we recorded it outside. So all the sound is from either from the studio row house or the sound of cicadas outside where we were recording in like 100-something degree weather. And then it becomes interspersed with the audio that I found online of Sandra's kidnapping.
And then, of course, it's the video inside, which I find captivating.
Tommy tonight.
Tommy Tonight. I can't do justice to the description, so I'll defer to Professor Jackson.
Can you just talk a little bit, Dr. Horne, about what captivates you about Tommy Tonight and the videos?
Well, I like the songs, for one. Although, as I said, I don't know the lyrics. Secret Garden. Does anybody want to break out into Secret Garden?
If you think I'm gonna take care of you, if you think I got what you need, show you're right.
All right. All right. Yeah, it's very captivating. And Professor Jackson is lip syncing. And there's a whole backstory to that, which you've already alluded to, if I'm not mistaken. But I guess that performance is quite a performance.
Sorry.
That's okay.
That's her alarm to see the sunset.
From when I was at Captiva.
Right. So maybe you should tell the backstory. Particularly, well, yeah, I'll leave it to you.
Particularly what? I came here to listen to you. This is all a ploy. This is all a ploy for me to get to hear you. So.
You know, what you said when you were doing at the Artist Colony in Maine, and your performance, and I hope I'm not giving the story away by suggesting that you're doing it as sort of a black male figure,
Yeah.
and apparently you were too convincing because one of the authorities found your presence to be incompatible with tranquility, so to speak.
So at Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, where I got to be with Houston artist Sarah Welch, who's here. She's a genius, and we got to meet there and become favorite friends, working and being artists there. So for all the young artists, any young visual artists in this space, it's my responsibility to encourage you to apply. This year's application is closed, but it'll open up again next year. It's a very special space created by artists for artists, I think in 1949, Sarah, right? Yeah, okay. Sure. And so we get to stay there for 9 weeks. It's a school for painting and sculpture. There are studios. Jacob Lawrence was one of the when in his youth was one of the artists who worked with friends to make that space. And so there are studios. You can make sculpture. You can make paintings. And photography also happens there. And so I was there summer 2019. And I got news that my mother, whose voice is embedded in this piece, and whose pictures are reimagined in these vinyl strips, I got word that she had moved to Bakersfield, California, unbeknownst to me. And we don't have any people there. So of all the places where we've had people, Bakersfield is not one of them. And with an amazing writer named Ikechukwu, who writes for the Los Angeles Times, in writing a piece about my body of work at Night Gallery from, what was that 2023, called Minute by Minute. I rely on historians and writers and journalists to help me understand the history that my work illuminates and its relationship to me. So I understood through Ike's writing that my mother ends up in Bakersfield as a part of like a longer history, not like actually, absolutely, as a part of an absolute and long history of displacement of Black people in Southern California. So that elder who hopped a train and from White Rock, Texas, and was in San Francisco and then Los Angeles cleaning houses, she had a ranch-style house. She bought everything in cash, because she worked informally. But I'd seen pictures of this house because she was such an amazing homemaker that sometimes journalists would come and take pictures of the beautiful spaces that she would create. And I remember growing up seeing an article, like a framed article. It was like laminated on a piece of wood, um, celebrating her. You know, Jacqueline Reynolds' beautiful home, and she's like, it's like the 70s or something, and she's like standing beautifully in this incredible living room, this place that I'd never seen before. What I learned only, what was that, 2019 or something like that, actually maybe, was that that was her house, and it was like a ranch style, huge house. And it was taken by eminent domain for the creation of the 105 freeway. So for those of you who fly out of LAX, that knot of highway. So Ike puts it into historic perspective for me that happened to my aunt, and she's given like, what, $3,000 or something like that as compensation. And she buys with it the house that she can afford, and that's the house that I end up knowing as my auntie's house. But like the house itself is like big as the kitchen was in the old house, you know? So we lived in the same place in mid-city Los Angeles my entire life, a fourplex with 3 other black women-led families in a mixed neighborhood of Korean migrants, Mexican migrants, and not migrants actually. They're just Mexican American people, because like at that point people had been there for generations. I now understand more things about the Korean War, about why my neighbors were who they were, that I didn't. It just was the way it was, you know. Like there were just like a lot of different languages spoken in the neighborhood, and we just all grew up together. That's just the way it was. But as is happening in every city center, people who have lived there for generations in historically black neighborhoods can no longer afford to live there if they don't own property. Or after 2008 and the foreclosure crisis, black home ownership rates are now lower than what they were during the Jim Crow era, which is wild when you really consider that. So my mother ends up moving all the way out into this place where we don't have any people, where the air quality is like the worst in the country. And I find out while we are at this like magical place, and I like immediately like slip into a very deep sadness and a feeling of foreboding that she's gonna die there. And so I conclude that I'm gonna hang out by myself and just like listen to tapes, listen to recordings of lectures that have happened there over the many years. Specifically, I wanted to listen to Bell Hooks's talk from Skowhegan and LaToya Ruby Frazier. I was just gonna listen to them on repeat and isolate and just be sad while everybody else around me was happy somewhere else. And I went to the bathroom and found that people were all getting dressed in drag, but I didn't understand what was going on. And so I was like literally going up to people, asking them like, what is going on? Conceptually, ideologically, what is happening? Because I don't think anybody like believed how confused I was, because I was literally like in a fog of my own fear. And then I stepped out and people were just something else. And then the artist who's based for a long time in Austin, Texas, Ariel Renee Jackson, offered to draw a beard on my face. As they were drawing a beard onto the face of artist Nikita Gale, and I didn't want to miss out. Like suddenly I wanted to go outside and play, and I went and found like a flannel shirt and put on my rain boots and some shades, and Ariel drew that beard on my face, and I became another person. And that night when we were walking through the woods going to the Common House for this party, where New Orleans-born artist Ashley Teamer, among others, were like performed their hearts out and like literally brought the house down. As we were walking through the woods, I remember my voice dropping, and I think I had a stocking cap on. Nikita had given me a stocking cap, so I didn't have a do-rag at the time, but I just got to become someone else. And my voice dropped, and I told them, I was like, we're gonna go get some numbers. We're gonna holler at some girls. We're gonna get some numbers. And I was like, I might not be with you in the morning, but I'll be your Tommy tonight. What I didn't know at the time, what I now know from the great educator, drag performer, and author Kareem Kabchundani, who wrote Decolonizing Drag, is that the art historical origins of drag is in mourning and kinship, not entertainment and celebration, but mourning and kinship. So what was happening to me in that moment is actually something that is also historically consistent. I just didn't know it at the time, that I was mourning I was anticipatory. I was engaging in a sense of anticipatory mourning. The historian and curator Rebecca K. Uchel actually helped me figure that out too in the essay that she wrote for Slow Jams. Rebecca's here. I became someone else. This character emerged under that pressure, and he was so convincing that I overheard a faculty member bemoaning to someone that there was this dude here who should not be there. Because after a certain hour, you're supposed to be faculty or one of the resident artists. You're not supposed to be there after a certain hour. But here's this dude that nobody knew, and I was like walking up to guest artists, telling them in Tommy's voice how much I enjoyed their lectures. It was a time was had, as they say. But then that led to us forming a group called The Talents as a nod to Octavia Butler's Parable of the Talents, and we performed at was not a fashion show, a talent show, a medley of R&B songs, including Peaches and Cream, All My Life, Come and Talk to Me, Jodeci, stuff that I loved listening to, like the music that I grew up listening to with my mother and with my friends. The pattern for me is actually that every time I'm missing my people or like afraid or under a certain sort of pressure, this was the case at MIT. Like I start hearing love songs, and then they become a part of whatever I'm doing, as like this balm that doesn't seek to be understood by anyone else anymore. And I guess that's kind of what happened with Tommy. And then when I went to Greece, he popped up there. So and then while I was in Greece, I found out that my biological mother had died. So like Tommy it's not something that happens all the time. He just like comes up when I don't even know I'm gonna need him. And then people have ended up liking him. So then there's this room that Miranda insisted on having in this show. I didn't want to include Tommy in the show. I think it creates confusion, but like people, but the presence of Tommy tonight and the group did the Secret Garden during lockdown. So the what is it? The metaphor of the Secret Garden in Quincy Jones's collaboration with Albie Shore and Albie Shore, James Ingram, Barry White. There's another one. Albie Shore, James Ingram, Barry White. That's right, Elder Barge.
Yep.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
that metaphor ends up flipping when we do that exquisite corpse. So we each filmed wherever we were in lockdown. So with us, it was with you in Cambridge. With Ariel, was with them and their now husband, their partner in Austin. With Ashley, it was New Orleans. And with Nikita, it was in Pasadena. And then we each recorded our part, and then we edited it together the way that you would draw an exquisite corpse drawing and pass it around. And then we had a world premiere event over Zoom, and we raised money to support ballot box protection at community-led organizations all over the country with Artists for Democracy. But at that time, everyone was making gardens, So like, yeah. Anyways, I digress. You don't want me talking about that stuff.
Thank you. I think it's a good time to open it up for Q&A.
Wait, Juneteenth. You got to tell us about Juneteenth.
Okay.
Right?
And then
we have to,
and then we'll go into Q&A. But to prepare for Q&A, we'd like to ask everyone, if you did write down a question, to pass it down to the end of your row. And then I think Yet is going to come around and collect the cards. And in the meantime, last thoughts on Juneteenth.
Yes. So the popular story, as most of you know, is that June 19th, 1865, the U.S. military shows up in Galveston to apprise the enslaved population that you're free. Don't you know about the Emancipation Proclamation, January 1, 1863, signed by Lincoln? Now, that's the popular story that circulated, and it helps to undergird a federal holiday, which I wholly support, needless to say. But it's not necessarily accurate, because the story is a bit more diabolical. When when the Emancipation Proclamation is inked by President Lincoln in 1863, Texas was in rebellion. The Lincoln government had no authority here. They had a separate government. And when the U.S. military shows up, it's 2 months after the Confederate States of America, which is seceded from the United States, including in Texas, on the premise of having enslavement of Africans forevermore. And what had happened, as some of you are familiar with Chicano history may know, is that during the 1860s, French occupying forces had seized control of Mexico. And the idea was to reverse abolition in Mexico, that is to say, to bring back slavery, and then the Texas enslavers would then defect en masse to Mexico to continue that institution forevermore. But with the arrival of the forces, June 19th, 1865, that plan was thwarted. But in any case, just to summarize quickly, June 19th is not only we're celebrating because it's taken on this aura, which is fine in terms of celebrating the end of slavery, but it's also important to mark because June 19th, 1867, the U.S. forces and the Mexican patriotic forces toppled the French regime and in fact executed Maximilian, who had seized control of Mexico, June 19th, 1867. So that's another reason to celebrate Juneteenth. And as I also mentioned in the book, the French had also brought over Africans, armed Africans from Algeria, from what is now Mali, for example, what is now Sudan, and many of them dispersed after the French regime was overthrown, and presumably some of them might have wound up in Houston, for all we know. So that's it.
Thank you, Dr. Horne. And then did you have a passage you wanted to read, Tomashi? And then do you trust me to choose questions? Okay.
Yeah, there's just so much more. There's so much more that I have questions about. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Dr. Horne, for your generosity, and thank you, Nia, for organizing us. Of course, I have more questions about Los Angeles and about the tide of people from Texas to Los Angeles. But there are passages in your book. I'm looking for it now. I just end up underlining everything, which is rough. But the Catos.
Oh, yes.
Can you talk about the relationship between the Catos and blackness?
So there are contradictory relationships between the African population and the indigenous population. On the one hand, you had indigenous groupings like the Cherokee in the southeast quadrant of North America, Georgia, for example, who seek to assimilate. They become Christians, they become sedentary agriculturalists, they enslave Africans, for example, but they still had to go on the Trail of Tears westward to Indian Territory, which was supposed to be Oklahoma, for as long as the river shall flow and the grass shall grow. But on the other hand, there are indigenous groupings like the Caddo, who basically engage in a merger with the black population of this continent. And they were not unique. Some of you may be familiar with the population we refer to as the Seminoles of Florida. And of course, the Florida State University football team, athletic teams are nicknamed the Seminoles, as some of you may know, which many object to. But they fought many bloody wars against the United States. Some of the bloodiest wars the United States was involved in, circa 1820, the 1830s, and the 1850s, before they were then forced to migrate as well, not only to this part of North America, but also southward into Mexico. But we need more research, like for most subjects, but we need more research on this subject in particular.
Can I read from this real quick?
Oh,
I know
sure.
Nia has we're running out of time. This is why. I'm pretty sure we're cousins. I just want to read this real quick, and then we're going to pass it on to Nia to read from these the questions that she's chosen. So here on page 15, the introduction of Dr. Horne's book, The Counter-Revolution of 1836. The alliances were mandatory since Texas, under whatever flag, faced unremitting hostility from Africans, indigenes, and Mexicans at times combined. By 1842, they were worrying about the grapes, or those defined as Caddo indigenes, who were said to be nearly black with kinky hair, i.e. free men of color. Mexico, it was said, gave them a tract of country in Texas, a recipe for conflict. Unsurprisingly, given the penchant in Texas to enslave those of their hue, a subsequent scholar Limned, L-I-M, am I saying that right? L-I-M-N-E-D, Limned, the quote, influence of the Caddos over other tribes, which was mentioned frequently in early Texas official records. They exercised a controlling influence over Huecos, Tuachenes, Quichis, Ionis, and Pawnees, and thus, said officialdom, were eminently injurious to Texas. The Caddos asserted another analyst, achieved a level of cultural development unsurpassed by other Texas Indians, and were the most important of the state's natives from several points of view. And just real quick.
Scene.
The indigenes of Florida, known as the Seminoles, to a degree, Caddo too had merged with Africans, but this meant they could be redefined as free Negro who were treated inhospitably in Texas.
Thank you. Okay, so I think this is how I'm going to do this. I want to read all the questions just to give them voice, but then there are two that I've picked for you both to answer, and then also feel free if there's something else you want to answer. But I think we have time for two.
Okay.
But I do want to just again give them all voice. So one person asked, what impact do you believe this regime's erasure of history on a federal level will have on your work? So that's a question, and I believe you can remember them all so that you can decide which one you want to answer. Another person asked, what is the significance of the structures? Colors, pinks, yellows, purples? Okay. And actually, yeah, and perhaps I can pass them to you too as well, so you can. Another person asked, you talked about working as hard as your ancestors, and in your video work you staged reenactments of police violence. Can you talk more about embodied practice and what it offers you as an artist in person?
That's so nice.
Wait.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm not
All
supposed to say anything.
I get to do this because we're best friends. All right. Another person asked, Tomashi and Nia, you've seen this exhibition in multiple venues across the universe, in parentheses. What strikes you about the presentation at CAM in particular? What have you learned about the work in this arrangement and venue? Right. Another person asked, what led Dr. Horne to pursue his JD at UC Berkeley, and what, if any, experiences in political activism are most memorable during his time at the institution? And then here are the two that I chose. Everybody, the other ones, you're like, it's like, So we'll see how you feel about these two. And also, again, just feel free to choose, but let's do two. So the first one that I chose, and I should just go ahead and read these both. The conversation has woven together family stories and subjugated histories, all surrounded by creative work that incorporates and reimagines and fragments archival materials. Could you all speak to what you understand these different modes of knowing to offer one another? And then finally, for those who haven't lived the experiences conveyed in your art, what would you want them to understand? Why is their support important? All right, so what's the first question that you would both like to answer?
Okay, so you're looking, okay. Well, with regard to the second question, being at Berkeley, I've actually written about that, and I've also talked about it a lot, and it's online as well, because in 2024, I published a book on the Panthers, and that was in their heyday when I was in law school, and I was involved with them. it's an anecdote that I tell often, and I'll repeat it here too, because I found it striking. So I was also teaching at this prison, Vacaville prison, and one of my students was named Donald DeFries, and I lent him a copy of a book of mine, The Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And I only mention that because he was able to leave prison, and then he died in a shootout in Los Angeles. Some of you might remember, or you used to seen video of it, because the LAPD sent the place up in flames. But that's sort of illustrative of my Berkeley experience. It was quite a time of turmoil, to put it mildly. And oh yes, the erasure. Yes, we in the state of Texas, we should all be concerned. I mean, there are book bannings in the state of Texas. Professors are losing their jobs because they said unpleasant things about Charlie Kirk after he passed away, or excuse me, was assassinated. I'm sure you're familiar with the change in leadership at Texas A&M because of controversy over how gender was discussed in a class, and a professor apparently lost her job as a result. So we in Texas have an uphill climb, and I hope I'm not the only person who's, as a matter of fact, I know I'm not the only person who's concerned about this. And I'm also concerned, quite frankly, about how it may affect me personally, because I don't take for granted, it would be ridiculous to take for granted the status quo. And I mean, that would be naive to the point of absurdity, in fact.
Am I supposed to answer that question too? Or
You can choose.
which-
Well,
I'm just
one was very
listening.
specifically for Dr.
Yeah, that
Horne.
was
So
for
yeah,
you.
why don't you choose a couple?
Oh, I get to choose one of them.
Yeah.
And oof,
There's one on the floor too. Which one is that?
I
one?
did give, yeah, I gave that to you too. Gosh, I don't know. This is so, yeah, Nia has to
Well,
choose.
perhaps
Um,
this
I-
one.
I was drawn to the one about embodiment. Yeah, I don't know, y'all. I don't know. The conversation has woven together family stories and subjugated histories, all surrounded by creative work that incorporates and reimagines and fragments archival materials. Could you all speak to what you understand these different modes of knowing to offer one another? I kind of want to push that back to you because this is.
That's an artist question.
Oh, I mean, you're a viewer. You're a viewer.
I can choose another one.
Gosh, this is just, it's all so good.
Okay, so how about
Signature.
this one?
signatures. Okay. Oh. Tomashi and Nia, I'm gonna give this back to you because your name is on it too. There you go. This is, yeah, okay. So, Tomashi and Nia, you've seen this exhibition in multiple venues across the country. Also,
yeah.
the universe, yeah. What strikes you about the presentation at Contemporary Art Museum Houston in particular? What have you learned about the work in this arrangement and venue? I love this presentation. This space is very unique, and it was challenging. You know, it made me, sometimes certain experiences and conversations, I feel like they form new neural pathways. And I mean, I will have lived a life in which I've gotten to have an exhibition that has traveled to different places all over the country. And that in and of itself is a joy. But I think, which number venue is this? So we started at MCA Denver, and then we went to ICA Philly, and then we went to Tufts University. So this is venue number 4. Say what? The other venues had rooms, so like the walls were built such that, it's the earliest work in the show is from when I was a student at Yale in 2014 to 2016. 16, the early work over there. And so I'd had these previous experiences of mounting the show. I'm actually like not needed for the show, for the work to be hung, for most of it to be hung. But I had these experiences of like being introduced to the layout of the space and how the team was gonna rebuild it for this show. It ends up being like a maze that you walking through like different eras and different like events. What's important to me, what I carry with me from the Bay Area and from Los Angeles, is a desire to embed my process with narratives of public concern, because I grew up in communities awash with muralism where our stories were in the built environment for us to see and be shaped by. So, like they all are embedded with these research-driven questions about public space, about labor, about migration, about state violence, about survival, about self-determination. So this space is something else. It's just something else. And it's also just so wildly historic. It's just so wonderful to be here. This summer when I was at Captiva at the Robert Rauschenberg residency, I got to be there digging through his books. And I flipped open one book late at night, and like one of the many, many books on Rauschenberg, and it opened up right in the middle to his presentation at CAM 1970-something. And I was like, wow, my work is there right now. Like this is just so wild. It's just so wild, And I was, I'm a child of fortune. I was, born here and taken from here, and have always wondered what it would have been like to be an artist here. So this iteration of the show, RKU, who wrote the question, is it's just beyond. It's beyond my wildest dreams. By the time we get here, I thought surely all of my wildest dreams have come true. Being able to see the show and fall in love with communities everywhere I've gone, from Denver, Colorado to Philadelphia, and then where we live now in Massachusetts. But yeah, I mean, it's a particular challenge. The open floor plan is a particular challenge. And when I got to walk in and see how Ryan and Jeff and Felice and Kenya, and how everything had been hung, it didn't make sense to me looking at a screen. But when I walked in, it completely took my breath away. And this iteration of the show, because this work minute by minute, that combines an image that I took of the Juneteenth festival in 5 Points, Denver, that's painted into the surface, and then the fragmented image on the vinyls are one of my mother's last 10 photographs that she took in isolation in Bakersfield before she died from previously undiagnosed illness. This is the first time that this work has been included in the show. So, because it now lives in Dallas, it's a part of a collection in Dallas. And we're really grateful to those collectors for lending it. And it also is embedded, when we stop here, the museum is open until 9. So Yet has told me that we'll be able to turn all the sound back up when we break. But it's embedded with the sound of this, as I told you before, this sound collage that Alexander Gideon made of my mother's conversation with me about our family's history. So, and then, the Doobie Brothers. So it's just something else. I mean, being able to show it CAM is something else entirely, and this iteration of the exhibition is something else entirely. It's just something else entirely.
Thank you. And that's the end of our conversation.